of me already knew I was hurting myself on purpose. There were photos he'd sent her, nothing scandalous, just a picture of a mountain trail he'd hiked, a dog he'd adopted, ordinary pieces of a stranger's life. But she'd replied to every single one within minutes. Faster than she ever replied to my texts asking what she wanted for dinner. I found myself doing something I'm almost embarrassed to admit. I started building a timeline in my head, matching her mood on certain nights to the dates on those messages. The night she came to bed humming to herself for no reason. The night she asked me, out of nowhere, if I still thought she was pretty. I had said yes, distracted, half watching a game on television, and she'd gone quiet and turned off her lamp without another word. At the time I thought she was just tired. Now I wondered if that had been the night Marcus told her something that made my answer feel like it wasn't enough. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet of our house, listening to the refrigerator hum, listening to my own heartbeat in my ears, and I thought about our wedding day. I thought about the vows she wrote herself, the one where she said I was the calm after every storm she'd ever lived through. I didn't feel calm anymore. I felt like the storm. When Rachel came home 3 days later, she looked tired the way business travelers always look tired, makeup a little worn, blazer wrinkled from the flight, rolling her suitcase through the front door with a smile that reached all the way up into her eyes. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I've never forgotten. Before you say a single word to her, ask yourself what you actually want the answer to be. Because once you ask the question, you can't unask it. You'll know, one way or another, for the rest of your life. I told him I already knew what I wanted the answer to be. I wanted it to be nothing. I wanted it to be a mistake, a coincidence, some boring explanation that would let me go back to believing my marriage was exactly what it looked like from the outside. Then don't go in swinging, he said. Go in listening. You'll get more truth that way than you will with accusations. I didn't confront her right away. I know some of you are yelling at your screen right now, telling me I should have called her the second she picked up, should have put that receipt on speaker and made her explain herself from a hotel room 3 states away. But I've learned something in this life. When you catch somebody in something this big, you don't get a second chance to see the truth. The moment you show your hand, they start building the story that protects them. I wanted the real one. So I did something I'm not proud of. I went digging. I started with her laptop, which she never locked because she trusted me completely, which made what I was about to do feel even worse. I found an email thread going back 4 months. Marcus Chen, now a director at a logistics firm in Denver. Rachel had reached out to him first. I saw the date, I saw the subject line, it's been a while. 4 months of messages. Not explicit. Not the kind of thing you could print out and slam on a table as undeniable proof. Just, warm. Familiar. The kind of warmth you don't have left over for an ex-boyfriend unless something in you has already started walking back toward him. There was one line from Rachel that I read maybe 15 times that afternoon. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed. The hotel receipt fell out of her jacket pocket while I was hanging it in the closet, and for a second I just stood there staring at it like it was written in a language I didn't understand. Point 2 guests. 1 room. King Bed. My wife told me she was in Denver for a marketing conference. Alone, I picked up the piece of paper like it might burn me, and I read the name printed at the bottom of the folio. Marcus Chen. I hadn't heard that name out loud in 11 years. But I'd heard it enough times before that to know exactly who it belonged to. Her college boyfriend. The one she almost married. The one she still, to this day, got a strange look on her face whenever somebody brought him up at a dinner party. I sat down on the edge of our bed, and I remember my hands were shaking so bad I had to put the receipt down on the comforter just to read it twice more, just to make sure I wasn't imagining the name, the date, the room number. She wasn't due home for another 6 hours. 6 hours to decide who I was going to be when she walked through that door. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that 3 days earlier, my wife Rachel had kissed me goodbye at the airport curb, told me she loved me, and said she'd call me that night after her keynote session. She did call. Every night. Sweet voice, tired from meetings, asking about the kids, asking if I remembered to sign the permission slip for our daughter's field trip. Never once did her voice sound like a woman lying to my face. That's the part that still gets me. She was good. She was so good at it that I started to wonder how long she'd been practicing. I called my brother that night, because I didn't trust myself to be alone with what I'd just found. He picked up on the second ring, heard the shake in my voice, and just said, "Talk to me." So I told him everything. The receipt. The name. The 6 hours I had left before she walked through the door pretending nothing had happened. I kissed her back. God help me, I kissed her back, and some small, stupid, hopeful part of me wanted to believe there was an explanation. Maybe Marcus had a room next door and the front desk made a mistake. Maybe it was a work thing, colleagues sharing a suite to split costs. People do that. I told myself that lie for 2 more weeks. During those 2 weeks, I had lunch with my coworker Diane, who'd gone through her own divorce 3 years earlier. I hadn't planned on saying anything, but somewhere between the second cup of coffee and the check, it just spilled out of me, the receipt, the name, the calls that always sounded a little too rehearsed. Diane set her fork down and looked at me the way you look at someone about to walk into traffic. "Whatever you do," she said, "don't let her know how much you already know. The second she realizes you've been quiet on purpose, she'll start controlling the story instead of telling you the truth." I asked her how she knew that. "Because that's exactly what I did to my husband for 8 months, she said. And by the time he found out how much I'd hidden, it wasn't just the affair he couldn't forgive. It was every single day I looked him in the eye and let him believe he was crazy for suspecting anything. That conversation sat in my chest like a stone for the rest of that week. 2 weeks of watching her check her phone under the kitchen table. 2 weeks of her stepping out onto the back porch to take calls she used to take right in front of me. 2 weeks of small things piling up until they weren't small anymore, a new perfume in her bag that I didn't recognize, a text notification she swiped away too fast, the way she started saying we when she talked about a project at work, and I realized she didn't mean her and her team. She meant her and him. I finally asked her about the Denver trip on a Tuesday night, after the kids were asleep, after I'd rehearsed the words so many times in the shower that they'd stopped sounding like sentences and started sounding like a script. I put the receipt on the kitchen table between us. Rachel's face did something I will never forget. It didn't crumble. It didn't panic. It just went very, very still, the way a person goes still right before they decide whether to run or fight. "Where did you get that?" she said. Not a question. A demand, quiet and cold. "Does it matter?" Rachel. 2 guests. 1 bed. Marcus Chen. She sat down across from me, and for a long moment she didn't say anything at all. I watched her hands fold together on the table, watched her knuckles go white. "It's not what you think," she said finally. "Then tell me what it is. Because right now, what I think is that my wife flew across the country to sleep with her ex-boyfriend and lied to my face about it every single night on the phone. I didn't sleep with him. The receipt says 1 bed, Rachel. The hotel messed up the reservation. I called down to the front desk the second I saw it. I swear to God, I slept on the pull-out couch in the sitting area. There wasn't even another room available that night because of some tech conference. I didn't." She stopped herself. Took a breath. "I know how it looks." "Then why was he even there? Why were you even with him at all? And this is the part of the story where I need you to understand something, because it changes everything that happens after." Rachel didn't cry. She didn't beg. She looked at me with something closer to exhaustion than guilt, and she said 4 words that hit me harder than any confession could have. "You really don't know." I told her I didn't know what she was talking about, and she let out this small, broken laugh, the kind that doesn't have any humor left in it. "Marcus works for the same parent company that owns half our biggest accounts now. My boss set up the meeting 8 months ago. I didn't choose to see him again, it just happened. And I should have told you the second I found out. I know that. But I was scared of exactly this conversation. I wanted to believe her. I wanted so badly to believe that this was just bad timing and worse luck, a coincidence dressed up to look like betrayal. But the emails were still sitting in my mind like a splinter I couldn't stop touching. Then explain the emails, I said. Her face changed again. This time it wasn't stillness. It was fear. You went through my computer. I found a receipt in your jacket pocket for a hotel room with your ex-boyfriend's name on it, Rachel. Yeah. I went through your computer. She stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor, and for a second I thought she was going to walk out of the room, walk out of the conversation entirely the way she sometimes did when things got too heavy. But she didn't. She stood there with her arms crossed, staring at the window over the sink, and when she finally spoke again, her voice had dropped into something quieter and much more dangerous. Do you want to know why I let myself talk to him again? Really? Yes. Because for 2 years, I have felt completely invisible in this marriage. You work. I work. We pass each other in the hallway like roommates. And Marcus, God, this is going to sound insane, Marcus remembered what it felt like to actually be looked at. To have somebody notice when I changed my hair. To have somebody ask about my day and actually wait for the answer. I felt something crack open in my chest, because she wasn't wrong, and some part of me had known she wasn't wrong for a long time. But knowing you failed somebody doesn't erase the betrayal of how they chose to cope with it. So instead of talking to me, I said, you talked to him. I tried talking to you. I tried for months. You'd nod along and then go back to your laptop. We stood in that kitchen and tore into each other for almost 2 hours that night, saying things neither of us could take back, and by the time we finally stopped, exhausted, hoarse, sitting on opposite ends of the couch like strangers, I still didn't know if I believed her about the bed. I believed her about the loneliness. That part one recognized, because I'd been feeling it too, just in a different shape. The next morning she left for work before I woke up, which she never does, and I sat at the kitchen table staring at that hotel receipt until the numbers stopped making sense. I made a decision that day that I still think about. I called Marcus Chen myself. I found his office number through the company website, and I don't know what I expected, denial, maybe, or that smug confidence men like that always seem to carry. What I got instead was a man who sounded genuinely uncomfortable the second I said my name. I figured this call might happen eventually, he said. Then you can tell me the truth. What happened in that hotel room? There was a long pause, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Nothing happened, he said. I want to be very clear about that, because I think you deserve to hear it from me too, not just from her. The booking system doubled up our rooms. It happens more than you'd think at conference hotels, and by the time we realized it, everything else in the city was sold out. She slept on the couch. I slept in the bed. We barely spoke that whole night, honestly, because it was uncomfortable for both of us. Then why does she sound like she's still in love with you in her emails? Another pause. This one felt heavier. Because I think she's been trying to remember what it felt like to be happy, he said. And I was there when she used to be. That's not the same thing as wanting me back. I'm engaged. I have been for a year. I never once tried to change that, and I told her more than once that whatever she was looking for, it wasn't going to find it with me. I hung up the phone and sat there in the silence of my own kitchen, and I felt something I wasn't prepared to feel. Relief, yes. But underneath that, something worse, shame, because a stranger on the phone had just described my marriage more accurately than I had let myself see it in years. I want to tell you the story ends there, with me showing up at her office with flowers and an apology, the two of us falling back into each other's arms wiser and closer than before. That's the version I would have told you if this were a fairy tale. But real marriages don't heal in a single scene. When Rachel came home that night, I told her I'd called Marcus. She was furious at first, furious that I'd gone around her again, furious that I hadn't trusted her word enough to leave it alone. But underneath the anger, I watched something else move across her face. Relief, maybe, that the truth had finally come from somewhere she couldn't control, which meant it had to be real. So now you believe me, she said, not really a question. I believe you didn't sleep with him. I don't think I believe you were being honest with me about anything else. Not for months. She sat down across from me again, in the same chair from that first terrible conversation, and this time when she spoke, there was no defensiveness left in her voice at all. "You're right," she said. "I wasn't. I let myself get close to something I shouldn't have, even if it never became physical. I let an old feeling fill up a space that should have belonged to you. And I think some part of me wanted you to find out. I think some part of me left that receipt where you'd see it, because I didn't know how else to make you look at me again." I sat with that for a long moment, turning it over, trying to decide if it made things better or so much worse. "You could have just told me you were unhappy," I said. "You didn't need a stranger from your past to prove it." I tried. More than once. "Do you remember the anniversary dinner last year? I told you I felt like we were roommates. You laughed and said every couple feels like that sometimes, and then you asked the waiter for the check before I could say anything else." I remembered it, but I hadn't remembered it like that. I remembered being relieved when the conversation ended, relieved I didn't have to sit in that discomfort a second longer. Hearing her describe it back to me now, I finally understood what that relief had cost us both. "I didn't take it seriously," I admitted. "I thought you were just having a bad night." "I was having a bad year," she said quietly. "You just weren't around enough to notice the difference." That sentence undid me more than anything else she'd said. Because it meant this wasn't really a story about an affair that almost happened. It was a story about two people who had quietly stopped choosing each other for months, maybe years, until one of us finally made enough noise that the other had no choice but to notice. We didn't fix everything that week. I want to be honest with you about that, because too many of these stories end with a bow on top, and life rarely ties one that neatly. We started therapy that following month. Real therapy, the kind where you sit in an uncomfortable office and say the ugliest true things about yourself out loud to a stranger, because somehow that's easier than saying them to the person you're supposed to love. I learned that Rachel had felt unseen for longer than I wanted to admit. She learned that my silence wasn't indifference, it was exhaustion dressed up as distance, the kind that creeps in after years of working too hard and forgetting to ask each other how we were really doing. Some sessions were harder than others. There was one afternoon our therapist asked me to describe the exact moment I stopped feeling close to Rachel, and I sat there in that little office, staring at a box of tissues on the table between us, realizing I couldn't point to a single moment at all. It hadn't been a moment. It had been 1,000 ordinary evenings, each one a little quieter than the last, until the silence just became the shape of our marriage and neither of us noticed it happening. Rachel had her own version of that same question. She admitted that she'd started rehearsing conversations with Marcus in her head months before she ever reached out to him, imagining what he'd say, imagining a version of her life where someone still found her interesting. She said it wasn't really about him at all. It was about wanting to feel like the woman she used to be before 2 kids, 2 mortgages, and 2 careers had worn the edges off both of us. I told her I understood that feeling more than she knew, because I'd spent plenty of nights scrolling through old photos of myself too, wondering when exactly I'd become someone who came home and disappeared into a screen instead of into my own family. It took almost a year before I stopped flinching every time her phone buzzed on the counter. It took her almost as long to stop apologizing for something that, in the end, never actually crossed the line she swore it hadn't. Marcus Chin got married that spring. Rachel and I saw the announcement on social media together, sitting on the same couch where we'd once torn each other apart, and she scrolled past it without a single flicker of hesitation. I remember watching her face when she did that, looking for some shadow of longing, and finding none. That was the moment I finally let it go. I think about that hotel receipt sometimes, sitting crumpled in my hand at the edge of our bed, and I think about how close we came to losing something we'd both stopped protecting. Not because of some grand betrayal in a hotel room 3 states away, but because of 1,000 smaller betrayals that happened right here at home, every time we chose our phones over each other, every time we said later instead of now, every time we mistook comfort for connection and let the real conversations wait one more day. I still keep that hotel receipt, folded up in the bottom drawer of my desk where I keep old photographs and expired passports. Rachel asked me once why I hadn't thrown it away, and honestly, I didn't have a good answer for her at the time. I think I keep it because it reminds me what complacency actually costs. Not in some abstract, greeting card way, but in real, specific terms, in the exact number of ordinary nights it takes to turn two people who chose each other into two people who simply exist in the same house. We renewed our vows on our 15th anniversary, just the two of us and our kids on a beach an hour from home, nothing fancy, no big guest list. Rachel wrote new vows that day, and one line has stuck with me ever since. I promise to tell you when I'm drowning, instead of waiting for you to notice the water. I promised her the same thing back. And I've kept it, even on the days it would be easier not to. Marriage doesn't usually end because somebody meets a stranger in a hotel lobby. It ends because two people stop showing up for each other long before anybody else ever walks into the picture. We didn't lose ours. But God, we came close enough to feel the edge of it, and I don't think either of us will ever forget what that edge felt like. If there's one thing I'd want somebody listening to this to take with them, it's this. Pay attention to the people you love before a piece of paper has to do it for you. Don't wait for a receipt, a message, a slip of the tongue, to remind you that the person sitting across the table from you needs you to actually look at them. Because by the time you find the proof, the real damage has usually already been done, quietly, one ordinary evening at a time, long before either of you noticed it happening at all.